The Galactic Council had watched humanity for 300 years. In all that time, they had never found anything remarkable about the young species. Humans were decent traders. They built acceptable ships. Their diplomats could hold a conversation without causing offense. But that was all. Among the 1,000 species of the unified systems, humanity was average at best. Admiral of the had spent his entire career studying lesser species. His people were the oldest and in the known galaxy. They had mastered sciences that younger races could not even imagine. When something strange appeared in the outer rim of human space, the Council naturally sent to investigate. The humans called it the storm, thought the name was foolish and emotional, exactly what he expected from such a primitive species. But he had to admit that the phenomenon was unlike anything he had ever seen. It hung in space like a wound in reality itself. Light bent around it in impossible patterns. Matter that drifted too close simply vanished. Probes sent into its depths never returned. Assembled a research team from 12 different species. He brought together the greatest scientific minds the galaxy had to offer, physicists from the crystalline, engineers from the mechanical, biologists from the aquatic. Each one was a master of their field, respected across hundreds of worlds. Among them was a human named Cole, had not requested a human scientist, but the Council insisted on including one as a diplomatic gesture. The Admiral assigned to a small laboratory in the lower sections of the research station. He expected nothing from the human and planned to ignore him entirely. Did not mind being ignored. He had spent most of his life working alone. His colleagues on Earth had called him strange because he asked questions that made no sense to them. He wondered about things that had no practical application. He dreamed about the spaces between stars and the moments between seconds. The storm fascinated him in ways he could not explain. While the other scientists focused on containing the anomaly, studied its behavior, he noticed patterns that everyone else missed. The storm did not destroy things randomly. It seemed to choose what it consumed. Ships that approached with weapons charged were pulled in immediately. Unarmed vessels lasted longer before being taken. This meant something was certain. He built a small model based on old human theories about dimensional folding. The mathematics came from papers written centuries ago by scientists who were considered dreamers rather than serious researchers. Believed they had been closer to the truth than anyone realized. After 3 weeks of work, he requested a meeting with Admiral. The agreed reluctantly, granting exactly 5 minutes of his valuable time. Explained his theory as simply as he could. The storm was not a random phenomenon. It was a doorway. Something waited on the other side, something intelligent. The anomaly was testing those who approached it. It responded to intention, to the thoughts and feelings of conscious beings. Listened with growing impatience. When finished speaking, the Admiral dismissed him with a wave of his long fingers. Human science was barely worth the name. Their theories were based on imagination rather than proven fact, had more important matters to address. Returned to his small laboratory and continued his work. He was not angry at. They had ruled the galaxy for so long that they could not imagine being wrong about anything. Their certainty had become a prison, though they did not realize it. The storm began to grow. Each day it expanded outward, consuming more space. The Council received reports of panic from nearby colonies. Millions of beings watched the darkness spread and wondered if it would ever stop. Authorized extreme measures. His team deployed antimatter weapons against the anomaly. The explosions were bright enough to be seen from neighboring star systems. When the light faded, the storm had grown even larger. It seemed to feed on their attacks. More weapons were tried. More failures followed. The greatest minds in the galaxy could not even slow the expansion. Evacuation orders were issued for 3 colony worlds. Millions of refugees fled toward the inner systems, carrying nothing but fear and uncertainty. Watched all of this from his laboratory. He felt sorry for and the others. They could only understand problems that could be solved with force. The storm was something else entirely. It did not respond to power. It responded to something deeper. He began building a device based on his theories. It was not a weapon or a shield. It was a key. If his calculations were correct, the device would generate a specific pattern of energy that the storm might recognize. It was a message, a greeting, a request for permission to enter. Dr. Marsh found him working late one night. She was another human scientist on the station, a biologist who studied alien ecosystems. She had barely spoken since arriving, but she was curious about the strange man who spent all his time alone. She asked what he was building, told her the truth. He was preparing to enter the storm. Thought he was joking at first. Then she saw his face and realized he was completely serious. She asked if he understood that no one had ever survived contact with the anomaly. Every ship, every probe, every piece of matter that touched it was lost forever. Nodded. He understood perfectly, but he believed the others had failed because they approached the storm as enemies. They came with weapons and shields and the intention to conquer. The anomaly recognized their hostility and consumed them. What if someone approached differently? What if someone came with open hands and an open heart? What if the key to survival was not strength but surrender? Did not know how to respond. She had been trained to think like a scientist, to trust data and evidence. Was talking about faith, about intuition, about things that could not be measured or proven. It made her uncomfortable. She left him alone with his work, but she could not stop thinking about what he had said. The greatest minds in the galaxy had failed to understand the storm. Perhaps understanding was not what the anomaly wanted. Perhaps it was looking for something else entirely. The storm continued to grow. Colony worlds fell dark as their populations fled. The council debated and argued and accomplished nothing. Admiral sent report after report admitting his failure. And in a small laboratory on a research station at the edge of known space, a human scientist built his impossible key. Cole did not know if his theory was correct. He did not know if he would survive what came next, but he knew that someone had to try something different. Humanity had always produced people willing to walk into the unknown. It was perhaps their only remarkable trait. Was simply the latest in a long line of dreamers and explorers who believed that the universe rewarded those who approached it with wonder instead of fear. The storm waited and prepared to answer its call. The storm had consumed 3 moons and was still growing. Admiral stood before a display screen in the command center, watching the darkness spread across the map like a disease. He had spent 200 years serving the fleet. He had solved problems that other species could not even understand, but this anomaly defeated him completely. A message arrived from the Council's highest authority. Read it 3 times before accepting that the words were real. Deep space sensors had recovered fragments of data from the lost probes. Something existed at the center of the storm. Something ancient. Something built by hands that had turned to dust millions of years before the first crawled out of their oceans. The structure at the center was older than civilization itself. The Council believed it might be a weapon of unimaginable power, or perhaps a source of energy that could reshape the galaxy. Whatever it was, they wanted it. They ordered to find a way to reach it. The Admiral assembled his team in the main conference room. Scientists from a dozen species filled the circular space, their bodies ranging from crystalline to mechanical to organic. They represented the finest minds the galaxy could produce, and none of them had any idea how to proceed. Explained what the Council had discovered. He asked for suggestions on how to reach the center of the storm. The room fell silent. Everyone understood what he was really asking. He wanted volunteers for a suicide mission. The physicist spoke first. His crystalline body hummed with nervous energy as he explained that the gravitational forces inside the anomaly would crush any known material. The engineer agreed. Their strongest alloys would last approximately 4 seconds before being torn apart. The biologist noted that no organic being could survive the radiation levels detected near the boundary. One by one, each scientist explained why the mission was impossible. Their voices carried the weight of certainty. They knew the limits of their technology. They knew the limits of their bodies. The center of the storm was beyond reach. Cole sat at the back of the room. He had not been officially invited to the meeting, but no one had stopped him from entering. He listened to the other scientists describe all the reasons why reaching the center could not be done. Then he raised his hand, noticed the movement, and frowned. The human had no business speaking in this gathering of superior minds, but the Admiral was desperate enough to hear any suggestion, even from such an unlikely source. Stood and asked a simple question. What if someone did not try to fight the storm? What if someone moved with it instead of against it? The other scientists exchanged confused glances. The physicist asked to explain what he meant. His tone made clear that he expected the explanation to be worthless. Walked to the front of the room. He had spent weeks studying the anomaly's behavior. He had noticed things the others missed because they were looking for the wrong patterns. The storm did not attack randomly. It responded to intent. Ships that approached with hostility were destroyed quickly. Unarmed vessels lasted longer. Probes that carried no scanning equipment survived the longest of all. The anomaly was not a natural phenomenon. It was a filter. It tested those who approached and destroyed the ones it found unworthy. The key to survival was not stronger shields or faster engines. The key was approaching with the right attitude. Admiral leaned forward in his chair. His interest was genuine for the first time since the meeting began. He asked to describe this right attitude. Took a deep breath. The storm seemed to respond to consciousness. It read the intentions of those who approached. Beings who came with fear or aggression were consumed. But what if someone came with acceptance? What if someone entered the anomaly with genuine willingness to be changed by it? The room erupted in murmurs. The scientists dismissed the idea immediately. Science was about control, about understanding natural forces and bending them to serve civilization. Surrendering to a phenomenon was the opposite of everything they believed. Raised his hand for silence. He did not believe theory, but he had no better options. He asked who would volunteer for such a mission. The survival rate would be effectively zero based on all available data. Met the Admiral's eyes without fear. He said that he would go. The murmurs became shocked whispers. A human volunteering for certain death was not surprising. Humans did foolish things constantly. But the calm certainty in his voice was unexpected. He was not seeking glory or trying to prove something. He simply believed his theory was correct and was willing to test it with his own life. Marsh watched from the doorway. She had followed to the meeting, curious about what he planned to say. Now she felt her heart tighten in her chest. She barely knew this strange man, but she did not want to watch him die. Studied for a long moment. The human was unremarkable in every visible way. Average height, average build, nothing that suggested exceptional ability. Yet something in his eyes reminded of the ancient explorers from history, the ones who had sailed into unknown waters and discovered new continents. The Admiral made his decision. He would allow to attempt the mission. If the human died, as expected, the galaxy would lose nothing of value. If he somehow succeeded, the Council would have access to the ancient structure at the center of the storm. Thanked the Admiral for his approval. He asked for 2 weeks to prepare his vessel. He would need to make modifications based on his research. The shuttle would carry no weapons, no shields, no defensive systems of any kind. It would be the most vulnerable ship ever to approach the anomaly. The other scientists watched leave the conference room. Most of them thought he was insane. A few wondered if perhaps insanity was exactly what the situation required. The galaxy's greatest minds had failed. Perhaps it was time to try something that made no sense at all. caught up within the corridor. She grabbed his arm and asked if he truly intended to go through with this. He could still change his mind. No one would blame him for backing out of a suicide mission. Smiled at her. It was a gentle smile, without any trace of fear or regret. He told her that humans had always walked into the unknown. Their ancestors had crossed oceans in wooden boats, knowing that death waited in every storm. They had flown into space in metal containers held together with hope and mathematics. This was no different. Someone had to be first. Someone had to show what was possible. Believed he was that someone. The storm called to him in ways he could not explain. It was not death waiting for him inside the anomaly. It was answers. It was truth. It was everything he had spent his life searching for. Let go of his arm. She did not understand his certainty, but she could not deny its power. Cole was either the bravest person she had ever met or the most foolish. Perhaps there was no difference between the two. The storm continued to pulse at the edge of known space. It had waited millions of years for someone worthy to approach. Soon it would have its answer. Soon the test would reach its conclusion. And Cole, an unremarkable human scientist, prepared to walk into darkness with nothing but faith to guide him. Spent 14 days preparing for his journey. He worked alone in a small hangar bay, modifying a standard shuttle according to his theories. The other scientists watched from a distance, curious but unwilling to help. They believed he was building his own coffin. The modifications were simple but strange. Remove the weapons first, then the shields, then the armor plating. Each piece of protective equipment was stripped away and set aside. When he finished, the shuttle was little more than a shell with an engine attached. Admiral visited the hangar on the third day. He stood with his long arms folded behind his back, studying the nearly naked vessel. He asked why he was removing the defenses. Even if his theory about the storm was correct, surely some protection would be wise. Explained that protection was exactly what he needed to avoid. The storm tested those who approached. It looked for signs of fear, for evidence that the visitor intended to fight or flee. A shielded vessel announced hostile intentions before it even crossed the boundary. An unshielded vessel announced something else entirely. Did not understand. His entire civilization was built on the principle that the strong survived and the weak perished. Approaching danger without defense was madness by every standard he knew. Smiled at the Admiral's confusion. He said that humans had a different relationship with weakness. They knew they were fragile. They knew they could be broken by forces beyond their control. But that knowledge freed them in ways that stronger species could not imagine. Humans did not need to pretend they were invincible. They could admit their vulnerability and find strength in the admission. The Admiral left without responding. He returned to his quarters and spent hours reviewing everything he knew about humanity. Their history was filled with moments of foolish bravery. They had fought wars against impossible odds. They had explored hostile environments with primitive equipment. They had achieved things that should have been impossible for such a young and weak species. Perhaps there was something to theory after all. Perhaps the storm was looking for exactly the kind of courage that only the vulnerable could possess. On the 10th day, Marsh visited in the hangar. She brought food because she knew he often forgot to eat when he was focused on his work. They sat together on empty cargo crates and shared a simple meal. She asked him why he was really doing this. Was it courage or something darker? Did he want to die? Considered the question carefully before answering. He told her that he had spent his whole life feeling out of place. He asked questions that annoyed his teachers. He wondered about things that had no practical value. Other humans called him a dreamer, and they did not mean it as a compliment. The storm was the first thing he had ever encountered that matched the scale of his questions. It was vast and mysterious and completely beyond understanding. He did not want to die. He wanted to understand. He wanted to know what waited at the center of all that darkness. If death was the price of that knowledge, he was willing to pay it. felt tears forming in her eyes. She did not know well, but she recognized something in him that she had felt in herself, the loneliness of being different, the ache of wanting something that others could not see. She reached out and took his hand. She told him that she hoped his theory was correct. She hoped he would find what he was looking for. And she hoped, against all evidence, that he would survive to tell her about it. Squeezed her hand gently. He made no promises. He could not predict what waited inside the storm. But he was grateful for her kindness. It had been a long time since anyone had treated him as something more than a curiosity. The morning of his departure arrived cold and quiet. The research station had paused its normal activities. Scientists and crew members gathered at the observation windows to watch the small shuttle launch toward the anomaly. Admiral appeared in the hangar as prepared to board. The carried himself with unusual humility. He admitted that he had misjudged the human scientist. He had dismissed ideas without proper consideration. Whatever happened next, wanted to know that his courage would be remembered. Accepted the gesture with grace. He harbored no resentment toward the admiral, had simply acted according to his nature, the same way the storm acted according to its nature. Everyone was trapped by their own patterns until something forced them to change. The shuttle launched smoothly, guided it toward the boundary of the anomaly, following a course he had calculated during his weeks of preparation. The storm loomed ahead like a wall of living darkness. It shifted and pulsed with energies that measurement. His communication system crackled to life. Voices from the station wished him luck. Scientists who had ignored him for weeks now spoke words of encouragement, thanked them all but kept his focus on the task ahead. The boundary approached. Sensors screamed warnings that ignored. The shuttle should have been torn apart by gravitational forces. It should have been cooked by radiation. Every instrument he had declared that survival was impossible. But the shuttle continued forward. The storm parted before it like water around a stone, felt pressure building in his mind, a presence testing his thoughts and feelings. He did not resist. He opened himself completely, offering everything he was to whatever waited inside. His voice came through the communication system, calm and clear despite the chaos around him. He described what he was seeing: colors that had no names in any language, shapes that existed in more dimensions than human minds could process, beauty beyond anything he had imagined. The station listened in stunned silence. His readings should have been impossible. His shuttle should have been destroyed 100 times over. Yet he continued deeper into the storm, his voice growing fainter but never losing its wonder. Then the signal vanished. One moment was speaking about light that sang and darkness that breathed. The next moment there was only static. His shuttle disappeared from every sensor. The storm swallowed him completely. Pressed her hand against the observation window. Tears rolled down her cheeks as she stared at the anomaly that had taken Cole. She refused to believe he was dead. She refused to accept that his theory had been wrong. Admiral ordered a memorial service. The counsel was that the human scientist had been lost. Plans for evacuation resumed as the threat assessment returned to its previous level. But continued watching the storm. She saw something the others missed because they were not looking. The anomaly had stopped growing. For the first time since it appeared, its boundaries were stable. Something had changed inside that darkness. Cole had walked into the unknown and vanished. But perhaps vanishing was not the same as dying. Perhaps he had found exactly what he was looking for. And perhaps, somewhere beyond the reach of sensors and logic, he was still sending a message that no one knew how to hear. 3 months passed after Cole disappeared into the storm. The research station continued its work, though the atmosphere had changed. Scientists who had once dismissed the human now spoke his name with quiet respect. His courage had impressed even the most arrogant among them. The storm remained stable. It had stopped growing on the day entered, and it showed no signs of expanding further. The council reduced the threat assessment. Evacuation orders were canceled. Refugees began returning to their homes. Admiral submitted his final report and requested transfer to another assignment. He had failed to understand the anomaly, failed to protect the colony worlds, failed to do anything useful. The experience had shaken him deeply. He no longer trusted his own judgment the way he once had. Marsh refused to give up. She spent every day analyzing the final transmissions from Shuttle. She played the recordings over and over, searching for any clue about what had happened to him. The other scientists urged her to accept his death and move forward. She ignored them all. The recordings contained strange patterns that no one else noticed. His voice carried frequencies that did not belong to normal speech. His words contained mathematical sequences hidden beneath the surface meaning. Believed he had been trying to send additional information, something beyond what ordinary listeners could hear. She worked alone in her laboratory, building equipment to decode the hidden messages. Her colleagues thought she was wasting her time. They believed grief had affected her judgment, but trusted her instincts more than their opinions. On the 92nd day after his disappearance, something unprecedented occurred. A signal emerged from the center of the storm. It was not a distress call or automated response. It was a deliberate transmission aimed directly at the research station. The signal carried voice. Was the first to recognize it. She ran to the communications center and pushed past the technicians who were staring at their screens in shock. Was speaking, but his words made little sense at first. He talked about the ancient structure at the center of the anomaly. He described an intelligence that had built it millions of years ago. He spoke of purposes that spanned ages beyond counting. The storm was never an accident. It was never a natural phenomenon. It was a test, a filter designed to identify species worthy of ascending to a higher level of existence. For millions of years, civilizations had sent their greatest warriors against it. They had attacked with their most powerful weapons. They had tried to conquer it through force and technology. All of them had failed. Was the first to approach with humility instead of dominance. He was the first to seek understanding rather than control. The intelligence at the center recognized something in him, something it had been waiting to find. It recognized the possibility that existed in humanity. His voice grew clearer as he continued speaking. He was not a prisoner inside the storm. He was a student. The ancient intelligence was teaching him things that no other being in the galaxy had ever learned. It was sharing secrets that could transform civilization itself. But there was a warning in his message too. The storm would not remain stable forever. It would begin growing again unless the species of the galaxy changed their approach to the universe. The old powers had grown stagnant in their dominance. They had stopped evolving because they believed they had nothing left to learn. The storm existed to remind them that the universe was larger than their understanding. Delivered specific instructions. Anyone who wished to approach the anomaly must come without weapons. They must come without shields. They must come with open minds and willing hearts. The intelligence would test each visitor individually. Some would pass and be welcomed inside. Others would fail and be turned away. The transmission ended with a personal message thanked her for believing in him when no one else did. He thanked her for watching the storm and refusing to accept that he was dead. He told her that he had found exactly what he was looking for. The answers were more beautiful than he had imagined. The station erupted in chaos after the transmission ended. Scientists argued about what it meant. Some believed the message was genuine. Others suspected it was a trick, some form of deception by the anomaly. Admiral demanded that the council convene an emergency session. Sat quietly in the middle of the uproar. She felt a strange peace settling over her. Was alive. His theory had been correct. Everything he believed about the storm had been proven true. The greatest scientific achievement in galactic history had been accomplished by a human who approached the unknown with surrender instead of strength. The council session lasted for days. Representatives from 100 species debated the implications of its message. Some refused to accept its validity. They had ruled the galaxy for so long that they could not imagine learning from a test designed by an ancient and unknown civilization. Their pride would not allow it. But other species were more receptive. The younger races, those who had never held great power, saw opportunity in its words. If the old ways had failed, perhaps new ways were needed. If dominance had reached its limits, perhaps humility offered a path forward. Requested permission to speak before the council. She was not a diplomat or a politician. She was just a biologist who had lost a friend and then found him again. But she had something important to say. She told the assembled representatives that humanity had always been weak by galactic standards. They had no natural weapons. Their bodies were fragile. Their technology lagged behind older species. But this weakness had taught them something valuable. It had taught them that survival required cooperation, adaptation, and the courage to admit what they did not know. Cole had walked into the storm because he was not afraid of his own smallness. He had succeeded where others failed because he did not need to prove his strength. The galaxy could learn from his example if it was willing to try. The council debated her words long into the night. Some dismissed her as a naive idealist. Others began to wonder if perhaps she was right. The universe had offered them a lesson. The only question was whether they were wise enough to learn it. The storm pulsed with new patterns of light. It was waiting. It had been waiting for millions of years. And now, for the first time, it had found someone worthy of its secrets. The question was whether the rest of the galaxy would follow Cole into the unknown or cling to the old ways until the darkness consumed them all. Admiral stood before the Galactic Council for the last time. His resignation had been accepted. His career was ending not in triumph but in confusion. Everything he had believed about power and progress had been challenged by a single human scientist who walked into darkness and found light. The council chamber was vast, designed to hold representatives from every species in the unified systems. Today it was filled beyond capacity. News of Cole's message had spread across the galaxy. Everyone wanted to know what would happen next. Marsh submitted a formal request to approach the storm. She wanted to find and bring him home if possible. The council debated for 7 days before granting approval. They assigned her a small team of volunteers from various species, beings who were willing to follow his example and approach the anomaly without weapons or defenses. The team assembled at the research station. There were 6 of them in total, led the mission as the senior human representative. A young scientist named had volunteered despite opposition from his crystalline elders. An engineer called wanted to understand the technology inside the storm. 3 others joined from species that had no names in human languages. They modified a transport vessel according to his principles. Weapons were removed. Shields were disabled. The ship became as vulnerable as any craft could be while still being capable of space travel. It was an act of faith made physical. Addressed her team before they launched. She told them that she did not know what waited inside the storm. She could not promise they would survive, but she believed his message was genuine. She believed the ancient intelligence was offering them a gift, a chance to see beyond the limits of their understanding. All they had to do was accept it. The transport launched toward the anomaly. Sensors tracked its approach. Scientists at the station held their breath as the vessel crossed the boundary that had destroyed so many others. Nothing happened. The storm accepted them without violence. The transport slipped through the swirling darkness like a fish moving through water. Gravitational forces that should have crushed them passed harmlessly by. Radiation that should have killed them went unnoticed. Reported what he was seeing through the communication system. The interior of the storm was not chaos. It was order of a kind he had never imagined. Patterns within patterns, structures that existed across multiple dimensions. The ancient builders had created something that every law of physics he knew. They traveled deeper into the anomaly for hours that felt like days. Time moved strangely inside the storm. Past and future seemed to blend together. Felt moments from her childhood mixing with possibilities that had not yet occurred. She held onto her purpose like an anchor, refusing to let the strangeness overwhelm her. The ancient structure appeared before them without warning. One moment they were surrounded by swirling energy. The next moment they were floating beside something that could only be called a library. It stretched in every direction, vast beyond comprehension. Knowledge from civilizations long forgotten was stored inside those impossible walls. Cole stood waiting for them at an entrance that opened as they approached. He looked the same as he had 3 months ago, but something in his eyes had changed. He had seen things that no other living being had witnessed. He carried knowledge that could reshape the galaxy. Embraced him without words. She had come so far and risked so much to reach this moment. Held her gently and whispered that he was glad she had found him. He had known she would come. He had seen it in the patterns that flowed through the storm. He led them inside the ancient structure. The interior was filled with light that seemed to carry meaning. Images floated in the air around them, showing civilizations that had risen and fallen across millions of years. The library contained the history of the universe itself. Explained what he had learned. The ancient builders had discovered something fundamental about the nature of existence. Progress was not about becoming stronger or more powerful. True progress was about becoming more connected, more open, more willing to change. Species that dominated through force eventually destroyed themselves. Species that embraced humility survived and flourished. The storm was not a weapon or a threat. It was a test and a teacher. It waited for beings who were ready to learn. It offered them access to knowledge that could transform their civilizations. But that knowledge came with responsibility. Those who received it had to share it with others. They had to become bridges between the old ways and the new. Had accepted this responsibility. He was no longer just a human scientist. He was a guide, a translator, a connection between the ancient intelligence and the younger species of the galaxy. He would teach what he had learned to anyone willing to listen. The team spent days inside the library, absorbing as much as their minds could hold. They learned about technologies that made their greatest achievements seem primitive. They learned about philosophies that resolved conflicts their species had fought over for centuries. They learned that the universe was far stranger and more beautiful than they had ever imagined. When they emerged from the storm, they brought with them. Their vessel was not destroyed as it crossed the boundary. The anomaly released them gently, like a parent setting down a child who had finished an important lesson. The research station received them with a mixture of celebration and fear. His return was proof that everything he had said was true. The storm could be approached safely by those who came with the right intentions. The ancient knowledge was available to anyone willing to learn. Admiral met personally. The bowed before the human, a gesture his species reserved for those they considered true teachers. He asked what he had seen when the storm first swallowed him. Smiled at the question. He said that he had seen himself as he truly was, small and fragile and utterly unimportant in the scale of the cosmos. And in that moment of complete humility, he had found something infinite. He had found the connection between all things. He had found the truth that the ancient builders had discovered millions of years ago. The universe did not favor the strong. It favored the brave. And the bravest thing anyone could do was admit their own weakness and ask for help. The storm began to shrink in the months that followed. Its purpose had been fulfilled. It had found what it was looking for. Other species began sending delegations to learn from and the ancient library. Some passed the test. Others failed and were turned away. But each attempt brought the galaxy closer to understanding what it meant to truly grow. Stayed at the research station with. They worked together to translate the ancient knowledge into forms that other species could understand. It was difficult work that would take lifetimes to complete, but neither of them minded. They had found something worth dedicating themselves to. Humanity's storm had swallowed the greatest among them. He had walked in and vanished, but he had emerged with gifts that would transform civilization itself. Cole had proven that humanity's greatest strength was not their technology or their military power. It was their willingness to embrace the unknown and be changed by it. The universe had waited millions of years for someone like him, and in the end, it was not a warrior or a conqueror who answered its call. It was a dreamer who was not afraid to be small in the presence of something infinite.